Thanks very much, Andy. That was a great introduction. Well, it's good to be here and see all the people here. When Neil first had the idea for this, we're thinking, would people respond? Would people come out? But people have. So it's really encouraging to see representatives from different groups, different walks of life, different ways of engaging with education in Scotland. So that's been fantastic. Now, a couple of times this morning, people mentioned people being reported to the PREVENT program, which is where you report someone if you're concerned they're being radicalized and there might be a terrorism risk. I was told by my school that I could be seen as a terrorism risk. They didn't actually report me, but they told me I could be seen as a concern because of my biblical views. And some of you will probably know that the General Teaching Council of Scotland started a case against me because I said that children need a mum and a dad ideally. And they dragged me through this process for 3 years before it all fell to bits at the end. So that's just another illustration of what Andrew in particular was saying about. So these things are happening throughout the UK and certainly here in Scotland as well. Now, education. I was a teacher until 4 years ago. And every term, I'll tell you which day was the worst day of the term. The worst day of the term was inset. That's the day when you have to go and listen to some training. The experts come in and share their wisdom with you. I'll share you some of the wisdom that I had to sit and listen to. Now, I didn't think about my microphone. I just need to put the microphone down to demonstrate. This is what you need to do to increase your understanding and ability in maths lessons. No laughing, thank you. This is quite serious. So someone came in and explained to us that if you do that to your head, it improves the blood flow to the brain, so therefore it's going to improve your mathematical ability. I heard another expert. They were talking about teaching maths to dyslexic students. And they said research clearly shows that dyslexic students struggle with 8s and 9s more than they do with the lower digits when making calculations. And they said, but you'll never guess what. You won't believe this. The exam boards still set questions with 8s and 9s in them. Despite it being proved, this discriminates against dyslexics. I heard someone else come in, and they were talking about exam performance, and they said, my son, he got his exam results, we opened them in the lounge, and he failed, whatever the exam was. So he retook it. The next time the results came, they thought, oh, maybe it's inauspicious to open the results in the lounge. Let's open them in the dining room instead. So they opened them in the dining room, and guess what happened? He passed. Now, when I sat there, I looked around the room of teachers, because I was thinking, what is going on here? For goodness sake. I looked around the room of teachers, no one batted an eyelid. Everyone's just sitting there nodding and listening away. We had an expert come in once to tell us how to deal with pupils who've been bereaved. And he said, what's really helpful to tell them is to say, it's just like people become a butterfly when they die, and they fly off with flapping wings like that, and butterflies are really lovely and colorful. So that's the message you need to give, really. We had another expert came and said, anyone can get an A star, that's the super high grade in A-level maths. Anyone can get an A star in A-level maths if they're just taught properly and encouraged and have the right support. Rubbish, just not true. It's like I could never get an A star, A-level in art. I just can't do it. It's not my thing. People coming in saying there are as many intersex people as there are ginger-haired people. It's just not true. It's just not true. There are people coming in and saying, if you just improve people's self-esteem, then everything sorts itself out. They'll do better. They'll be nicer people. It's not really true. People coming in saying, if you can just work out people's learning styles, if you can work out what learning styles suits each individual pupil, then you can teach that way, and they'll do far, far better. Sounds a nice idea, but it's not really true. When you tried, it doesn't work. Then you have people coming in saying, what we need to teach the children to learn how to learn. Because the problem is that they don't know how to learn, so they need to learn how to learn, and then they'll be able to learn more successfully. So the whole school's full of that sort of ideology. The research comes through. Doesn't really work. I mean, the latest one when I was in school, growth mindset was the thing. You have to give people a growth mindset. If they've got a growth mindset, they'll do fantastically. It makes all the difference. It unlocks their potential. A bit more research comes through. Doesn't work. doesn't really work. Now, I used to find an inset. My theory was all insets should be conducted in the gents' toilet of the school. And the reason is this, because we'd listen to these experts speaking, and I'd be sitting there thinking, this is nonsense. I don't believe a word of it. So sometimes I'd put my hand up, and I'd say, well, I'm not sure I see it that way. I mean, might it not be that there's another way of looking at this? And there'd be this uncomfortable silence in the room. People go, the feeling would be, how could you be so impolite to the visiting expert? And then, the session would move on. Then when it gets to break time, have your cup of tea, go through to the gents, and people will come in and say, oh, so glad you said that. It's a load of rubbish, isn't it? Oh, you tell them, I'm so glad you said that. I was thinking as well. Sock it to them. And then you go into the second half, and everyone's sitting there again, nodding their head, making notes. And maybe I'd put my hand up again. And that's the way we go. Now, teaching is a profession. And almost all teachers are very professional in what they do. They treat it as a profession. They act professionally in the way that they deal with children. When it comes to the evidence behind it, often teaching doesn't really work like a profession. If the medical profession worked like the teaching profession, we would be in big trouble. Because instead of prescribing what the evidence really says, they'd just be going along with just whatever the latest fashion was. There's someone been going around saying, blue pills are really good for you, so we're giving everyone blue pills this week. But that's the way the teaching profession often seems to operate. Because all these strategies, all these philosophies, they are philosophies. It's based on their values. It's often based on the way people wished the world was. They wished if you did just give enough encouragement, anyone could do anything. So why am I telling you this? The reason I'm telling you this is I'm trying to boost your confidence to stand up against the educational establishment. Because what we often find ourselves doing is we're standing in opposition to what the Scottish government is saying, what all the parliaments in the Scottish Parliament are saying, what Education Scotland are saying, what the General Teaching Council of Scotland are saying, the teacher training colleges, the unions, the OECD. But they all tend to say the same thing. But very often, we need to say, thanks for sharing your thoughts, we disagree. We reject your philosophy that you bring to us. Now, they may feel like Goliath. I don't need to carry on, do I? You get the point. They may feel like Goliath, but we can stand up to them. Because the philosophy of education, the values in education that are dominant in Scotland at the moment, in some cases they're unchristian, in some cases they're anti-Christian, and in many, many cases they're not compatible with a Christian view of the world. And that's what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. Now, if I said to you, what's the most anti-Christian element in education in Scotland? Probably almost all of you would say sex education. Sex, gender, sexuality education. And I think absolutely. I mean, I've addressed that issue many, many times. I'd encourage you to get this book, the Family Party Bookstore, going through the curriculum in great detail, lurid detail, I would say. But that's quite an obvious thing, isn't it? I mean, anyone who's got a passing familiarity with biblical standards would look at what's been taught in those areas and say there's something far, far, far wrong there. Okay, so we get that. We've heard a bit about that already. But I'm going to look at some other areas now where it's maybe not so obvious and where Christians perhaps haven't realized in some cases or haven't thought through the way the educational approach isn't actually in line with Christian values. Now, some of the speeches we've had today have been very inspiring. I felt inspired. But at the end of this one, I'm not sure you're going to say you feel inspired, but I hope you're going to say, right, that really made me think, actually. I'd never thought about that before. There's more areas where Christian values in education apply than perhaps I'd realized before. Now, if we could have my first slide up, please. Yeah, that's the one. That's right. Now, what I've done here is down the left-hand columns, I've put some words, roughly speaking, that you'll often hear in Scottish education. That's what the good people, that's what the right people, that's what the fashionable people say. Then in the right-hand column, I put a word to contrast with it. Now, when I was picking the words in the right-hand column, I didn't try and pick words that would sort of be a bit sensitive and acceptable to people. I tried to pick a word that, if you said it in the school staff room, people would tend to go, what was that word you just said? Surely you don't actually want to bring that into discussion, do you? So I'm being a bit provocative there. I'm not suggesting they would be the words you'd use if you were discussing that with people. I'm trying to be provocative just to make it clear where the dividing lines are. Now, Neil wanted the slides for this on Thursday, so that was all of them. When I came to timing it, I'm not going to get through anywhere near all of them. I'm going to get through a selection of them, but you can take a picture there and have a think of some of the others if you like. So the first one, progressive. In Scottish education, everything has to be progressive. We want to have the most progressive education system in the world. That's the sort of thing you hear. So progressive, what does it mean? Well, progressivism is based on the idea that we're heading in the right direction. Our society is improving. Once upon a time, there was an age of ignorance, cruelty, and bigotry. But since sometime in the 1960s, usually, we've started an era in progress, and we're leaving that behind. Now, progressives absolutely hate Victorian values. That's just the arch enemy as far as they're concerned. So the direction we're going in is right. So the further we can carry on going in that direction has got to be good. So change is good, more change is better. Whatever's the newest thing, that must be the best thing. Now, what do we make of that as Christians? Well, of course things can improve. Of course people can have new ideas. Things improve in lots of different ways. But to a lot of progressives, part of what they see themselves as progressing beyond is Christian faith and Christian values. So if you see the way things are presented in teacher training colleges, for example, that's often the context. It used to be founded on this sort of Christian ideology, but we've progressed from that, and we've got something better now. I mean, the classic illustration of this is in Victorian times, pupils sat at desks, listened to the teacher, did work sitting at the desk, and then did a test, and they had to gain knowledge. Okay, perfectly good things. But to a progressive, that's old. That's the way it used to be. So if you're going to make progress, you've got to move away from that. It's going to be group work and games and IT and singing songs and exploration, skills, experiences, etc., etc. Now, are those new things good? Yes. Yeah, they're very valuable, very valuable. But to a progressive, you've always got to be going in that direction. Doesn't matter about the evidence, it's always got to be in that same direction. Whatever the problem, the prescription's the same. Move further in the progressive direction. Now, as Christians, we don't quite go along with that. We've got God's wisdom to guide us. We don't have to be guided by the latest fashions in human thought. We've got something better than that. So progress, yes, we do progress in some ways, but we don't have faith that whatever the latest idea is, that must be the best. God's wisdom is what we refer back to. Well, the next one, secular. This has been mentioned already. Schools should be secular because secular is neutral. Well, that's not obviously true. A school has to have some values system. People say a secular school includes everybody. That doesn't necessarily always work out that way. You don't need any sort of faith values for a school to function. Secular values are fine. Learn about religions in RS, and that will do. What do you think that does to the moral values in a school? Well, what it does is it makes them adopt a lowest common denominator value system. Because lots of moral values that I hold, a lot of people in society don't hold them. So if you say we're only going to have the values that are in common, secular values, then you end up with lower standards of morality. Now, years and years ago, I did some research in the school where I was working. And what I did is I gave a questionnaire to the boys. It was a boys' school. It's not that I missed out the girls. It was a boys' school. So I gave a questionnaire to them, and it said things like, murder is wrong. Agree, strongly agree, disagree. Shoplifting is wrong. Traveling without a ticket is wrong. Smoking cannabis is wrong. All sorts of questions, a whole range of moral questions. And the pupils rated basically how strongly they agreed with that being something that was wrong. And then what I also did was ask them a question of how they worked out what was right and wrong. And I gave them different options. They could say they worked out what was right and wrong from the Bible. They took what the Bible said. Or they could say they look at what the law says. Or they could say they mainly look at what society says. Or they could say they mainly think it through for themselves. And then what that enabled me to do was to compare their moral values with where they say their moral values came from. Guess which group had the strongest moral values? Guess which group was most against everything? murder, shoplifting, stealing, taking drugs. I mean, the whole lot. Which group was most against them, had the strongest values? The ones who said their morality came from the Bible. Okay, which group had the weakest moral values? Well, you can probably guess it. The ones who worked it out for themselves. They worked it out for themselves. So what strategy do schools employ for moral values? The pupils need to work it out for themselves. They don't need any religious authority. They work it out for themselves. That is a formula for permissive values. That's how you get permissive values in a generation. And that's not by accident. That is the goal in view, and the education policy is there to produce that. So I think that's really important in terms of the moral values, because if you leave out a religious foundation, there is no grounding for moral values. There's no objective reason to believe in morality. So you have classes where the teacher will say, right, class, shall we all agree that we're going to be nice to each other? And, after a bit of discussion, they might all say, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, we agree to it. But what does that say to them? You only have to be nice to people because we've all agreed. What if you decide not to agree? Does that mean you don't need to be nice to each other? You take away the religious element, and the whole idea of morality starts to drain away, and that's what we see happening in the values of schools. Now, in terms of the bigger questions of life, transcendent questions, big questions of faith, life, death, etc., other speakers have spoken about those. But certainly as Christians, we can offer something better than people becoming butterflies when they pass on. That's for sure. Right, the next one I was going to talk about was equity. I had to chop this one. I was going to talk about the poverty-related attainment gap, a central thing in Scottish education. I'll skip over that. Right, equality is another one. Equality, when you hear the word equality, that just means fairness, doesn't it? Good, equal, fair. That sounds positive. But when you hear the word equality in Scottish education, or with regard to children in Scotland, we need to be a bit careful. Because sometimes what people are meaning is equality between adults and children. Because their philosophy is that children are oppressed. They're an oppressed group, and they're oppressed by adults. So what we need to do, we need to liberate children from adult authority. The way some people put it is to abolish childhood. How does that fit with the teaching of the Bible? To say the least, it doesn't. Teaching of the Bible is children are brought up, nurtured, cared for, and guided, instructed by their parents and by other adults. So again, even a word like equality sounds so benign, but it can be used in a way that's undermining our biblical understanding. Right, the next one, children's rights. Now, anyone who's been anywhere near a school in Scotland, a mainstream school recently, will know all about children's rights because there's an obsession with them in Scotland. And it's the religion substitute of Scottish schools. So children's rights, is that going to do any harm, having that? Well, let's have a think about it. The way they're presented is if this is the foundation of human goodness. So in the olden days, you might have an assembly where it'd be based on a Bible story, and you draw out a message from that. Now, you're much more likely to have an assembly about human right number such and such, or children's right number such and such. So the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, children are taught all about it. What do these rights say? There's 52 of them. I'll just go through a couple. Right to life, right not to be subjected to degrading punishments, the right not to be sent to war to fight, the right to an education, the right to develop your talents, the right to play, the right to social security. Now, to the average child in a school in Scotland, what relevance do those rights have? I would say virtually nothing. Virtually nothing. I mean, what's the point of teaching children in school that they've got a right to an education? I mean, it doesn't achieve anything at all. But what it does do is it conveys to children that all the things that are done for you, someone had to do them. It was their duty. You've got a right to be looked after and cared for. So it takes away any concept of gratitude, which again I think is an important thing. Now, out of all these rights, what do they take from them? In general, they just take one of them, and, well, two of them actually. One of them says you've got a right to be listened to. Children have got a right to be listened to. Do you agree with that? Have children got a right to be listened to? Yes? Yeah, of course. If you read the original right, it's obvious what the context was. It was, for example, would you like to go and live with mum or would you like to go and live with dad? That's the sort of situation. But in schools, it gets taken to mean you've got a right to have a say in everything, from who the next head teacher is, and it ends up at the point where children are basically taught that no one's got the right to tell you what to do, because they've got to listen to what you want as well. So if a child hears, right, you need to do that, you need to go and do that now, they're likely to think, whoa, hang on a minute, have you not heard of children's rights? You need to listen to my opinion as well. You can't just tell me what to do. And the Scottish government at the moment has got a document that's in the Parliament, going through the process very slowly, to redefine child abuse. And one of their definitions of child abuse is this: make the child feel that their opinions, views, or feelings are worthless. Make a child feel that their opinions are worthless. That's child abuse. The Scottish government wants to make it that that's child abuse. Now you can see which way this is pushing things. This is undermining the authority of parents hugely. It's undermining the authority of schools, the authority of teachers, by basically telling children, no one's got a right to tell you what to do. Everything should be negotiated. They should always hear your opinion as well. And the other right is, you shouldn't be subjected to degrading punishments. Now, you can imagine what degrading punishments might mean. But in Scottish schools, that gets translated into, you shouldn't be punished. You really have got a right not to be punished. So the government's made videos with children saying, basically, I don't like it when I'm punished. I don't think adults should punish me. Again, undermining the authority of parents and teachers. Because what children's rights do, they always take away the role of parents and instead give it to professionals. Because who tells children about their rights? Professionals. Who do you go to if you're concerned about your rights? Professionals. So it's pushing parents out of the picture, giving more and more influence to professionals. What's missing from these rights? If these are the foundation of morality, what's missing from them? How about don't steal things? How about tell the truth? They're not there. They're not there in any human rights. So you find in schools in general, those sort of messages will not come through. So from a Christian point of view, I think the influence of children's rights in Scotland is concerning. Again, something that sounds so benign, doesn't it? It sounds so benign, children's rights, but then you look at the way it's implemented, there's a real tension between what's going on and Christian values. Right, next one, I'm going to skip over this one. I'll just give it a sentence. Qualified and unqualified. The emphasis on Scotland is on professionals. Now, do you want professionals to deal with your children? Well, of course. You don't want any old unqualified person dealing with them, don't you? But then hang on a minute. Who's the unqualified person who actually deals with them the most, has the most influence and most responsibility, and is the most important person in their life? Well, it's their parents. Their parents. But the culture growing up in Scotland is you've got to be qualified, you've got to be professional. These are the people who really know what's going on. And again, I would think looking at Christian belief, that special relationship between parents and children is sacrosanct. And this pulling away towards professionalism is not a healthy thing. Right, harm reduction. That's another catchphrase in Scottish education. You can't go too far without hearing about harm reduction. So what's that all about? This will be the approach, for example, teaching about getting drunk or taking illegal drugs or having sex. The harm reduction approach is basically based on the idea that you're not going to change young people's behavior. They're going to do what they're going to do. So we give up on the idea of trying to prevent them from taking drugs or prevent them from having sex or anything like that. They're going to do it. So what we do is we just try and give them some tips so that when they do it, it won't do quite as much harm as it might otherwise have done. I mean, the classic case from this was from when I was teaching, was I had a group of 12, 13-year-old boys, and the police officer came in to speak to them about drugs. And the police officer said, held this drug up and said to them, when you take this drug, make sure you drink lots of water with it. And I said, thinking, what? When you take this drug? Excuse me? So the police officer finished the talk. I shook the hand, thank you very much, and showed them out. I mean, she said things like as well, I'm not here to tell you what to do. It's up to you to make your own decision, whether you take illegal drugs or not. I'm not here to tell you what to do. This is a police officer. So I showed her to the door, said, thanks very much. Then I went back into the boys and said, right, I've got a bit to add to that. There's a bit more to it, actually. Because it's not just up to you. It's not up to you because it doesn't just affect you. If you choose to take drugs, for example, that will affect your family. It'll affect your friends. It'll affect the company that you work for. It'll affect wider society. It'll affect the people that you smash into in your car when you're under the influence of drugs. It's not just your decision. It's something that's wrong. It's inherently irresponsible, so you shouldn't do it. That was me going out on a limb and ad-libbing, because that's not the message that you're supposed to deliver in Scottish schools. It's supposed to be harm reduction. So what tips can we give you so it's not quite so dangerous? The illustration I like to use about this sometimes is joyriding. You know what joyriding is, don't you? You steal a car and drive it like a complete maniac for fun. So if you're addressing the issue of joyriding from a harm reduction point of view, you'd say, right, hey kids, we realize, obviously at your age, you want to drive cars like maniacs. We realize that, we quite understand. But we don't want you to get injured. So we really would encourage you, really slow down for the corners. That's really important. Then eventually they might get to the point, look, we're going to give you free helmets as well. So, you can have a free helmet, then the next time you go joyriding, put the helmet on, and it will keep you a bit safer, and we will have reduced the harm of joyriding. What a great job we've done, haven't we? Now I think, no, I haven't done a great job. If something dangerous, if you make it seem safer, what do people do? Oh, I feel a bit more confident giving that a try now. Now I've got a few tips to keep safe. I think I'll go ahead and give it a try. So the whole assumption of the harm reduction approach, I think, is wrong. I think the first line should be a moral message. Should be looking at these decisions, right? This is a decision that's going to be harmful to you. It's a dangerous decision. Don't do this. It's wrong to do this. It's irresponsible to do this. That should be the primary message. But in Scottish schools, it isn't. What would be the Bible's view on these things? Does the Bible say do wrong things but then try and minimize the damage that it does one way or another? No. So the harm reduction approach that dominates Scottish schools, in many ways, it's antithetical to Christian values. Right, the next one I picked out, counselling and punishment. Now the word punishment, whenever we put the word punishment in a Scottish Family Party document, someone always says, oh, do you really need to use that word? Can we not use another word? Can we not call them consequences or something? So even the word punishment has now been demonized in our society. Now in Scottish schools, in lots of schools, behavior is in crisis. If you look at what the teaching unions are saying, they say people are leaving because the behavior is so bad, it's very stressful. Some schools have police officers stationed on the campus permanently in order to police the pupils. I mean, I think that is a shocking indictment of Scottish education. But I've heard stories from several people where, for example, in a primary school, a boy will just flip and go berserk. He'll start throwing chairs around the classroom, gets thrown all the books off the shelves, just basically destroying the place. And the standard procedure is that the rest of the class will be evacuated, and then the guidance teacher will come along and say, Peter, obviously something's making you angry today. Can we go and talk about it? Peter says, F off, and carries smashing the classroom up. So eventually Peter gets bored of smashing the classroom up, and the guidance teacher says, right, Peter, now that you've calmed down, can we go and have a talk about it? Then they take Peter away, so we sit down and have some biscuits and play on the PlayStation, have a chat with the guidance teacher, and then they put the classroom back together. Peter's back in class the next day, and it goes on. Now, you may think that story is, well, it is extreme, but that's not unheard of. That is not an unusual event in Scottish schools. I've heard that from teacher after teacher, that that's the sort of thing that happens. So what's the response to the Scottish government to it? Behaviour crisis in schools. Abolish punishments. That's the response. Now, they don't quite point blank say you're not allowed to use punishments anymore, but their message is always, punishments are ineffective, they're counterproductive, there's a better way, we don't need them. And if you're a good teacher, if you're a good school, you won't need to use them. Because instead of punishments, we've got restorative approaches. So no matter what anyone does, someone punches someone, then what they need is a little counseling session. They need to talk about what they were thinking at the time. Did they really understand that it hurts people when you punch them? Because maybe that was the problem. They didn't quite understand that that's the way it works. And they think that is it. So no matter whatever a pupil does, the right response is a mini counseling session. Help people to make friends again. And they claim this is based on research, but as so often in education, the research is absolute bunk. Half the teachers didn't even fill the forms in. The teachers that did fill it in, a lot of them were saying it just didn't work and it was a total disaster. But that's been pushed in schools all over Scotland. And the philosophy behind it is humanistic. Children are basically good. They're basically good. If they've done something wrong, it's more they've malfunctioned. It wasn't malicious. They've malfunctioned. So we can just help them to see, and then they'll do the right thing next time. It just amounts to making excuses for pupils. Now, the person who's done it, so that let's say the boy who's just battered someone, he has this little chat, little counseling session. He thinks he's got away with it. The rest of the pupils look at it and think, well, what happened? He just attacked that pupil. What happened? Well, they had a little counseling session. They all think he got away with it as well. I mean, is it any wonder that disciplines fall into bits in so many Scottish schools? So what's gone wrong? Let's get to the heart of the matter. Okay, let's go to Christian teaching. Wrongdoing deserves punishment. Wrongdoing deserves punishment. I mean, that's a fundamental element of Christian teaching. Without that fundamental, the concept of grace and forgiveness doesn't have any meaning. So you've got to start from that. So we've got a generation being brought up in schools, partly where discipline is breaking down, but the other issue is when pupils who've been brought up with this hear the gospel, you've sinned, you deserve punishment, you need forgiveness. That sounds like a different language. They'll be thinking, what are you on about? Why do we need forgiveness? I mean, God should just have a little chat with me, and that should all be okay. That's another area. 2 to go. How am I doing for time? I'm doing okay. Right, the next one. Caring. Caring. Do schools need to be caring? Of course they do. Of course they do. The word I put in contrast to it is tough. Now, I dare anyone who's a teacher to sit in any discussion in a school in Scotland and say we need to be tougher on the pupils. I dare you to do it. It could well be your last day at school, the day you said that. Because there's a huge emphasis on therapeutic education. It's about well-being, scenarification, as I call it, the well-being indicators. So constantly checking, how are you feeling today? Are you worried about anything? Are you anxious? Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling sad? Are you feeling your friends are treating you okay? Now, if you're constantly saying that to people, is there a problem? Are you sure there's a problem? Well, it creates the impression that you really ought to have a problem. The normal situation, as you're going through your school week, should be that it's really traumatic and you're struggling to cope, and you can only just about get through it with the help of the teacher and a little bit of counseling. Now, of course, I'm not saying in the slightest that pupils don't need support at various times, but this is a massive, massive imbalance issue. And one way of thinking about this, if you think about, the typical mother and the typical father, you go to the playground, mum might say, oh, be careful, don't go too high. Dad's more likely to say, go on, you can get to the top, go on, you can. In schools, it's really flying off the end of the spectrum on the sort of mum side, if you like. There needs to be a balance, but it's going off to a real extreme. So what sort of pupils is this going to tend to produce? It's going to produce fragile pupils. They'll believe the message that they're really vulnerable. Because the belief is, if something tough happens to a pupil, if they face a disappointment or a failure or a punishment or whatever, they'll think that's going to do lifelong damage. That's going to scar them psychologically. Children are so vulnerable, so they need to be protected from every possible negative experience. But what space does that leave for character development? I mean, let's look at God. Does God love us? Does he care for us? The answer is yes. How does he treat us? Does he cosset us? Prevent us from experiencing anything challenging? Does he avoid us experiencing anything tough that might result in our character growing? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I think in terms of the way we deal with children in school, I don't think we should try to be more caring than God. We need a balance. We need to be caring and supportive, but there needs to be a challenge. There needs to be character building as well. Right, one last thing. Gender neutral. One thing after another in Scottish schools, they will brag about the fact that it's gender neutral. Now, as a Christian, what do I believe about gender? Well, sex, actually. We're really talking about sex. I believe that male and female are complementary. They're designed to bring different qualities into a marriage, into family life, and that's a good thing. Also, opposites attract. So it helps bring together the man and woman into the bond of marriage and then into family. That's what I believe. So I believe the fact that there are differences between men and women on average, then that's part of God's plan. That's a good thing. It's not a problem for me. I don't say it's wrong for men to do anything or be any certain way. I don't say it's wrong for women to do anything or to be any way. But on average, those differences, I think, are part of God's plan. For me, it's not a problem. In Scottish education, though, it most definitely is a problem. Because their mission is to eliminate every difference between the sexes in school. Every single difference. Because where they think it comes from is it's the fault of society. It's our sexist society. It's the patriarchy. So something's gone wrong in society, and that's resulted in boys and girls being a bit different in what they're interested in the way they behave, in their personalities. So they think it's a problem to solve. I mean, they're wrong. And they're wrong. I mean, I outline my Christian beliefs. Even look at the scientific beliefs. Research on babies just a couple of days old will show that male babies are more likely to turn to look at a thing, say a mechanical device, and young girls, little girls, baby girls, are more likely to turn to look at a face. So as soon as we're able to measure it, these differences are there. But as far as the Scottish educational establishment is concerned, utopia is when we've eliminated these differences completely. So in lots of schools, they don't even allow the words boy and girl to be used at all. And if you have you do have different courses, and pupils choose what they want to study. And for example, more boys than girls choose to study physics. As far as I'm concerned, I say, okay, fine. If that's what they want to do, as long as they had a free choice, that's no problem. The Scottish government says, no, this is a problem. We've got to have as many boys as girls doing every single subject. In further education colleges in Scotland, if you have a course with more than 80% of one sex, you have to have a plan of what you're going to do about it. So if you're running a car mechanics course and it's 82% male, the government says you've got to have a plan. You've got to do something about it one way or another. I don't know, kick one of the boys off the course or something, or make a girl transfer from, I don't know. But they say something has to be done. Now, back in the 40s, 50s, doing physics, for example, it wasn't a choice for girls. I'll tell you something when I was at primary school. I find this quite unbelievable to remember it. When I was at primary school, the boys did science while the girls did needlework. Can you believe that? I'm not that old, but the boys did science while the girls did needlework. I mean, that's terrible, terrible. But subsequent to then, now, all subjects are open to all pupils. So as the options opened up, more girls, through the 50s and 60s and 70s, more girls started choosing, say, physics. But then it leveled off. And it's stayed level ever since. So Education Scotland pays 6 people to try and persuade more girls to do physics. And they completely fail, because it just flatlines every year. It's the same percentage all the time, because basically boys and girls are just choosing what they want to do. They're trying to force them into uniformity. So in Scottish schools, if you can get girls to do something that's normally associated with boys, then that's seen as a great victory. So if you can get them playing rugby, doing engineering, then that's really fantastic. We can really celebrate that. Whereas I would think, okay, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. And if you can get boys doing things that would normally be associated as being feminine, if you can get them decorating cakes or sitting around talking about their feelings or whatever, then that would be seen as, again, that's fantastic. That's real progress. We're solving the problem of sex inequality. And I think what that creates in a school, it creates the context for sort of where transgenderism can flourish, because you're saying to them, it's really positive. We celebrate it when you do things outside of gender stereotypes. Now, I say these differences between boys and girls, as far as I'm concerned, are absolutely fine. I think as far as God's concerned, he's thinking, yeah, that's the way I made things for a good reason. So in this area, it's as though the Scottish educational establishment has declared war on human nature. Now, if you declare war on human nature, ultimately you're going to lose. Let's face it. But in the meantime, a lot of harm can be done. A lot of confusion can be caused. I think that's happening in Scottish schools at the moment. Right, to conclude. Now, I started off by saying, if I said to you, what's the worst thing going on in Scottish schools? You probably would have said sex, sexuality, gender, education. And I wouldn't disagree with you. It is utterly appalling what is going on. Now, we've heard from other speakers as well about the importance of bringing Christian faith, worship, prayer, Christian teaching into education. That's really important as well. What I've tried to do in this talk here is to talk about some other areas as well where our Christian values have got a part to play. So as Christians, I think we've got more to bring to the debate than stopping the sex education and bringing in our spiritual teaching. We've got a lot more to offer. We've got more to offer in home education and Christian schools, but also in terms of the debate about what happens in state schools. Because as Christians, we might think, right, we need to look after our own kids. So we're going to start a school, we're going to homeschool, and I'm right behind it. I'm right behind it. But also as Christians, I don't think it's okay for us to say, phew, we've looked after our own, we've rescued our own kids from it, job done. That is not job done. That is not job done. We care about all the other children as well. Their parents might not share our values, but we care about them. So we look after our own, and we try and look after everyone else as well. We try and protect everyone else's, because unchristian, anti-Christian ideology is rampant in so many areas of Scottish education. Now, I'm aware tonight, maybe some of you, if you're teachers, maybe there's some of the things I've talked about. Maybe it's the first time you've considered them from a critical perspective. Maybe my 2 or 3 minutes on that topic hasn't entirely won you over, and you thought, oh, I'm not quite sure what he's saying there, and maybe I need to look into it a bit more. I would encourage you to look into it a bit more. There's lots of videos on the Family Party website on some of these issues, or send me an email, and we can I can share some more resources about it. I mean, it can be difficult if you're in an environment where you're surrounded by a totally dominant ideology. Everyone thinks it, everyone understands it, every conversation proceeds as if it's taken for granted. It can be difficult to step outside that and to critique it, but that's what we need to do. Right, meanwhile, what will be happening in Scottish schools? Well, the progressive ideology will continue. So whatever problem comes up in education, and there are plenty of them, in everything you can measure in education, virtually, things are deteriorating. But whatever the problem is, the solution from the establishment will always be the same. It will be the reason things are not right is because we haven't gone far enough in the progressive direction. So all those policies we've been implementing for decades have got us into this mess. The real problem is we just haven't gone far enough in that same direction. And if we keep going far enough, all will be well. Well, I admire their faith. But I don't admire their values. Well, we've got something far better than that. We've got God's wisdom, and we want to educate our own children in accordance with it, and we want all the children of Scotland to benefit from it. Now, I would encourage you to look at the Family Party store. There's lots of resources you could take away some to show to other people as well. I think they're very valuable for that. Now, Neil reckoned there's going to be about 128, let's say, 128 people here today. And I've been very happy to speak to you, but I have to confess something. You're not actually the 128 people I want to be saying this to. I want to be saying it to a different 128 people. And the 128 people I want to be saying this to are the MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. That's what I want to be doing. And that's the vision of the Scottish Family Party. It's a mountain to climb, and we're climbing it in order to bring this wisdom, to bring these values to where they're most needed, at the heart of decision-making, in the heart of government. Now, just to conclude, if you could bring up the last slide. Right, the QR code there. This is something we did recently. Well, I did a slideshow on the side of the Scottish Parliament showing some images, lurid images for the sex education resources. So if you want to point your phone at that and just take a picture of the QR code, you'll get that video. And if you would share that far and wide, we would very much appreciate that. And I'll just mention while we're on the subject of projection, our deputy leader, Phil Holden, is there, who dealt with the technical side of the projection. And if you wanted to see him, he's got some information about projection and various apps that he's developing there you might be interested in hearing a little bit more about. So, I mean, the symbolism of this is we're having to show this on the outside of the Parliament. What we ultimately want to do is take it to the inside. So thanks very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the conference.